welcome to today's lesson. My name is Ken Muragori. I'm a GMAT trainer with the Kenya IELTS program, and today we'll be doing a topic on verbal reasoning, specifically in critical reasoning. So we'll be trying to determine what you should take as truth in the critical reasoning section. So we know that critical reasoning requires an understanding of the author's meaning and the requirements of the question. So this means whatever information that you are given in critical reasoning, you should be able to understand what it means, understand exactly what the author was trying to pass along, and then read the question and understand exactly what information is it requiring you to know so that you can answer that question. So this requires a distinction of presented facts versus the rest of the information. For example, opinions and scenarios. So sometimes you'll be given information that is not really fact, like when two people have differing opinions, and sometimes you're given scenarios. So scenarios, sometimes they can take one side of an argument, or it can actually incorporate some facts. So we want to be able to tell what information among all the information that I'm given am I supposed to take as absolute truth. So because as we eliminate, we consider out of scope answer options, and these are answer options that do not really help us in solving our question. So you have an understanding of the information given, you understand the question, and you are able to tell if an answer choice won't help you answer these question. So out of scope questions, as we say, they are unrelated to the question requirements. So you'll find that they are irrelevant information introduced in an attempt to solve the question. So say you need a specific type of information, and then you're given information that doesn't fit those parameters. So you're supposed to look, say, within here, or if it's about a specific topic, and then you're given an answer choice that doesn't fall within that. So how do you identify out of scope choices? So one of the things that will help you is if you identify what is true and what is not, because that will help you now eliminate these out of scope answer choices. And what do I mean by this? If you know that the question is asking for, say, something related to the economy, and you get something unrelated to economy, you can now easily eliminate this answer option as an out of scope question. How and why? Especially when you understand the question. So our question stem, if you understand the question stem, and of course you fully understand the information that you're given in your stimulus, you can easily be able to tell out of scope choices from the choices that even seem out of scope, but they are actually relevant. So what should we take as absolute truth in critical reasoning? So first of all, you take premise as absolute truth. And note that here we are saying the premise and not the stimulus, because the stimulus now it includes the premise and the conclusion. So the conclusion is not always absolute truth, because in some question types, like weakening the conclusion or assumption questions, the conclusion is actually played around with. That means maybe you are supposed to prove that it's true, you're supposed to prove that it's false, you're supposed to weaken it, you're supposed to see the flaw in the logic that this conclusion stems from. So we are not including conclusion in absolute truth. So we are just saying the premise. What is the premise? It's this information that you're given as an introduction. So especially when you are being presented to with a scenario. So the premise, we take it as truth, and here the author's word choice is crucial, as we will see in some examples that we will do. So just missing one word in the premise will distort the truth that you pick. And once that is distorted, your eliminations will not be sound. And then number 2, if true scenarios. So this especially appears in the question stem, where you are told which of these scenarios or which of these statements, if true, does something to the conclusion. So as you eliminate, if you are dealing with answer choice A, you should take that information in answer choice A as absolute truth, and then try to see if it fits the parameters of our question stem. So we've been talking about the conclusion. So the question, if our question has a conclusion or an argument, the question will always revolve around it. So most of the questions require us to either support or strengthen, weaken or prove it false, that strengthen the argument and weaken the argument questions, or evaluate it. So evaluations are the ones where you have to determine whether the conclusion is true or false. So in short, you're determining the truth of the conclusion. So the truth of the conclusion always depends on the specifics of the question. So that is why we do not assume that the conclusion is true. So it's usually true depending on the specifics of the question. So to see this in action, we'll do a couple of examples. And these examples will be focusing on determining the truth of the question and the stimulus, and how these affects how quickly you can answer a question, how easy or difficult a question is. So this is our first example. You can go ahead and pause, try the question on your own, try to determine which statements or what parts of this example you can take as truth, then solve it, and then we'll discuss. So our question reads, the commentator says, the theory of trade retaliation states that countries closed out of any of another country's markets should close some of their own markets to the other country in order to pressure the other country to reopen its markets. If every country acted according to this theory, no country would trade with any other. So the commentator's argument relies on which of the following assumptions? So we can say that this is an assumption question. What do we know about assumptions? Any assumption or the assumption that you pick, it must be true for the conclusion to be correct. And if this assumption that you pick is false, so if it happens to be false, so that is, if you negate this choice, the conclusion should either be false or should weaken. So let's determine what we should take as truth here. So we say that there's this theory of trade retaliation. So all these parts you should take as truth. So there's this theory that exists, and this is what it says. And then you have an interesting scenario here. So if every country acted according to this theory, so we know that not all countries act according to this theory, but this question presents a special case where we are presented with a scenario. So this scenario, if this scenario was to happen, this would happen. So this is the core of the argument, and this argument is made based on this scenario. So to answer this question now, you take this scenario as true. So because the argument is based on this scenario, and we are evaluating this argument, we take this scenario as true. So we take the premise and that scenario part. So as we go to answer the question, we'll be assuming that every country is acting according to this theory and trying to evaluate if the argument is true. So will this really happen or not? So if we go to A, no country actually acts according to the theory of trade retaliation. So note that if you know what to take as truth, you will not eliminate answer option A like straight away, because the argument is not that every country will act according to this theory. The argument is assuming so every country is acting to this theory. So if every country acts according to this theory, no country will trade with one another. So with that, you can easily eliminate A, because it goes against a truth that we require to answer this question. B, no country should block any of its market to foreign trade. Again, one of the truths is every country is acting according to this theory. And we know if they act according to this theory, they can actually block a market if another country closes its market to it. Say trade disputes should be settled by international tribunal. So this theory seeks to solve trade disputes. So it's handling trade disputes. And how is it handling it? By the rules of this theory. So again, goes against the truth. So we have already eliminated 3 answer choices very easily. Then D, for any 2 countries, at least one has some market closed to the other. So if we are given 2 countries, A and B, we are saying at least one has closed a market to the other. So maybe A has closed its market to B. That means now B will retaliate. And if you do that for all the countries, it will mean that every country will be blocked to the other country. So actually this is true, because if we find that if we have, say, 200 countries and there are 2 countries, X and Y, that haven't blocked any market of, so X has not blocked its market to Y and Y has not blocked its markets to X, this whole argument falls apart because it says no country. So, of course, as long as the market is not blocked according to the theory, the trade will continue. So this theory doesn't state that everyone should just close the markets. It's if the market is closed by the other country first. So you can keep the E, countries close their markets to foreigners to protect domestic producers. So this now is out of scope, doesn't really help us, isn't even related to the argument. So E is out. Our answer is D.
You are watching Success with Bob Mwiti Show, presented to you by Upstack America. Upstack America is a consulting company that helps immigrants find amazing higher education and job opportunities in the tech industry in the United States. You can find our programs by going to www.upstackamerica.com. Upstack America, we wake you up to the unlimited potential.
So for our second question, just go ahead and pause and try the question by yourself. So in this question, we say that we want to evaluate an argument. So we have our premise here. So all this is the premise. So this is truth. And then we have now our argument here. Therefore, for most feed corn farmers, switching to genetically modified seed would be unlikely to increase profits. So we have our arguments, which is basically talking of switching to the genetically modified seeds will equate to will not increase profits, or is not likely to increase profits. Remember to use the author's words and not to paraphrase. So in evaluating an argument, we want to know if this is true. So is this true? So we are determining the truth of this argument. So whatever that will help us determine the truth of this argument is our answer. And in evaluating, of course, if you are able to determine if this argument is true or if this argument is false, you have determined the truth of this conclusion. So A, whether there are insect pests that sometimes reduce feed corn yields, but against which commonly used insecticides and the genetic modification are equally ineffective. So we see now, because remember we are comparing genetically modified seed to the corn that is not modified, that is ordinary corn. So this experiment, it's testing whether there are some insect pests that affect genetic modification, and if you use genetic modification for pest control and using insecticides, they do not work. So for that, we cannot really tell if this genetically modified seed, using them will not increase profits. B, whether the price that farmers receive from feed corn has remained steady over the past few years. So you see, now this tries to see the price of farmers that receive of the price that farmers receive for feed corn. We know feed corn now is either ordinary or the genetically modified seed. So both farmers receive these, they sell feed corn. So for that reason, this can't really help. Whether the insecticides typically used on feed corn tend to be more expensive than insecticides. So this option introduces other crops. So comparing corn to other crops won't help us because we are comparing corn to corn. Just that one is genetically modified, the other is not. D, whether most of the farmers who tried the genetically modified corn last season applied more insecticide than was actually necessary. So you see, now we are comparing if these farmers of genetically modified corn used more insecticide than was actually necessary. This actually means that if they did use more insecticide than was actually necessary, we can say that this argument is probably false, because if they used exactly the right amount of insecticide, they would probably see increased profits because it's less cost. And on the other hand, if they did not use more insecticide than was actually necessary, then this argument is probably true. So these will be very useful to know in order to evaluate the argument. So it's just evaluating the truth of the argument. E, whether for most farmers who plant feed corn, it's their most profitable crop. Again, we don't see any comparison, so it doesn't help us. For that example, so go ahead and pause, and then we'll discuss the question. So here now we have a company that has two divisions performing remarkably consistent over the past 3 years. So the question says, regarding the past 3 years, which of the following can properly be inferred from the statement above? So these inference questions, they never have a conclusion. So why do they not have a conclusion? Because you are required to come up with a true conclusion based on this premise. So that means automatically this is our truth. So you're using the information there as, so that's your premise to come up with a true conclusion. So A, total dollar sales for each company's division have remained roughly constant. So remember that you are supposed to understand your truth. So if you go back to your premise, you'll find that, so we have consistency and then we have a column. So what's the column doing? It's explaining. So what's this consistency? Is that the pharmaceutical division has accounted for 20% of dollar sales and 40% of profits, and the chemical division for the balance. That means 80% of sales and 60% of profits. So you understand that. So this is the consistency. So if you say total dollar sales for each of the company's divisions have remained roughly constant, you cannot really infer that because we do not know the total sales, and the totals don't have to be constant so that the ratios can be constant. You can have total sales here as, say, 100, and the pharmaceutical division to have 20, and then the next year it can be 1,000 and the pharmaceutical division has 200. So numbers versus percentages don't really go hand in hand. B, pharmaceutical division has faced stiffer competition in its markets than has the chemical division. So this is something that is out of scope. We don't know anything about competition. We just know what happened. So it can have happened for many different reasons. So we can't really infer that. We can't make this conclusion. The chemical division has realized lower profits per dollar sales than has the pharmaceutical division. So this is actually on point because we can see if it's 40% of profits and just 20% of sales, this means that a lower percentage of sales is making more profits than the chemical division. So the chemical division is having lower profits per dollars of sales than has the pharmaceutical division, even if the pharmaceutical division accounts for the largest percentage of the profits. So it's lower profits per dollar of sales. So keep C. D, the product mix offered by each company division has remained unchanged. We don't know anything about that. E, highly profitable products accounted for a higher percentage of the chemicals division. So this actually is the opposite because if the pharmaceutical division is highly profitable, but it accounts for less sales. So this is actually opposite of what we should infer. So eliminate E. Our answer is C. Then we have our last one here. So this is weakening the researcher's reasoning or argument. So we have our premise here, and then we have the conclusion here. The reports of encounters with ghosts and other supernatural entities generally result from prior expectations of such experiences. So which of the following, if true? Remember we said if true, when you're handling a question choice, you should take that question choice as truth. So we have truth number 1 here. And then as you consider an option, remember not to carry over the truth of A to B. So A is just independent. Once you're done with it, you forget about it. So A, none of the volunteers in the second half believed the unusual experiences they reported were supernatural. So here we see that the first half were told that the theater was haunted. So if the second volunteers, the second half, believed the unusual experiences were none believed the unusual experiences they reported were supernatural. It wouldn't have anything to do with prior expectation. So this wouldn't weaken. If this was the first half, that would be a different story. So because we are weakening the researchers' reasoning. So B, all the volunteers in the first half believed that the researcher statements that the theater was haunted was a lie. So all of them believed it was a lie, and yet they reported more unusual experiences. So if this is the case, this means that being told that the theater was haunted didn't really have any effect on them. So these unusual experiences they had wasn't based on prior expectation of such experiences. So we can keep B. C. Before being told about the theater, the volunteers within each group varied considerably in their prior beliefs about supernatural experiences. So this does nothing to the argument. D. Each unusual experience reported by the volunteers had a cause that did not involve the supernatural. So if this is true, that it had a cause, these volunteers, though, they did not know. So our option D, each unusual experience reported by the volunteers had a cause. So even if this is true that every unusual experience did not involve the supernatural, the volunteers didn't know. So these cannot really weaken the argument, because we know that it's talking about reports of encounters with ghosts and resulting from prior expectation of such experiences. They do not know, so this can't count if the researchers did not believe that the theater was haunted. So again, the belief of the researcher here isn't important. What is important is the belief of the volunteers. So this is not relevant, out of scope. And now we have answer is B. So we can see here how knowing what is true and what is not actually helps us with solving different types of questions. And you really have to understand, you can't say that you pick the truth and then you do not really understand it. So you have really to understand first and then determine which part is true or which part you should consider as absolute truth, because that is what will help you in your eliminations and determining which information is out of scope. So that was our lesson today, and I'll see you in our next lesson. Bye.